So, Fiachra, we're talking about rights and responsibilities and social justice. I suppose, do you want to maybe start us off by giving your understanding, your description of what rights are and what responsibility means?
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose to me, human rights are the things that we're all entitled to. I think they're inalienable. Every single person in the world, regardless of who you are, what you look like, where you're from, and how much money you have, that's something you are absolutely entitled to. And I suppose what they are to me are, they're a framework, and they're a way of ensuring that everyone in society, the most vulnerable, most marginalised, really is being looked after, and that their basic entitlements are being met. And there's so many of them. There's freedom from discrimination, your right to safety, right to asylum, right to your nationality, right to protection, the right to protest, and then the right to be treated with dignity. They're just some of them. And I suppose they sound lofty, they sound aspirational, but they're very real, and they're things that actually make a huge, meaningful difference in people's lives. That this framework of human rights. So what we're really thinking about here is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights from 1948. So that was 73 years ago, and it's a framework for working towards achieving that sort of society. I suppose a socially just society, really, where people's rights are vindicated.
Yeah, and I think the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is a sort of a key moment in history, as sort of where the nations of the world came together and said, okay, well, what do we need in order to have a world that's harmonious? What do we need in order to have societies that are, as you said, are socially just? And they settled on these 30 articles of rights and responsibilities as well. Obviously, because a right implies a responsibility. But they didn't just come out of nowhere. I think is a really interesting point. Like, a lot of people seem to think, they keep on talking about the Universal Declaration as if it was the first thing ever, but obviously that came out of a long period of different societies grappling with this idea of how do you organize society in such a way that people have rights and people have responsibilities, so that we're able to be good neighbors, that we're able to live together, that we're able to know what we're entitled to and know what's expected of us. And I suppose that's where, to my mind, human rights really are central to the whole idea of social justice. Because I always understood social justice to mean people being given what they're entitled to, and people being, the classic definition of giving a person what's due to them. Is so maybe if you want to, what do you think of that, Fiachra?
Yeah, no, I'd agree with you. And I suppose I think, like you said, it was the 1948 Declaration was, I suppose, a culmination of centuries of human progress and human development. It was also 3 years after the end of the Second World War. The first 50 years of the 20th century there's awful things happened. You had the First World War, you had the Second World War, you had the Spanish influenza, you had uprisings, and you had coups, and you had famines. And I suppose when there was just so much violence, there, at the end of it all, there had to be a recognition that we need a better way of doing things. Because I think broadly society maybe understood that people should be treated equally, but there was always caveats that some people are more equal than others. If you're a property owner, you're probably treated a bit more equally. If you're a man, you're absolutely treated more equally. In some countries, if you were a Protestant or if you were a Catholic, you were treated better. And then obviously, in the case of, I suppose, Nazi Germany, we saw how Jewish people were persecuted, and with the entire genocide there, and how other marginalized groups were too. So there was a recognition that the idea that we're all equal needs to be fleshed out a bit more. That needed I'd say a framework, which I think the Human Rights Declaration is. It's not just saying things in an abstract. It's saying there are 30 articles, these are inalienable, and we as a global society need to actually work towards achieving them. And it's not saying that, you know, the world since 1948 has been perfect. It's been far from perfect, but it did set a standard that we should be working towards. And I suppose the important thing now is that if say there's a genocide, or if people are being persecuted, or there's government repression, it's not just saying, oh, well, there's a bad thing happening in that country. It's saying that people's rights are being violated, and that's totally different, because that's universal. There's no stuff of, oh, well, the local context there, the local context here. It's very simple, you know. If people's right to be free from discrimination, or the right to safety, or the right to protest is being prevented, that is a violation of their universal human rights. And like, there's no coming back from that. So the international community often maybe doesn't quite stand up to the ideals of the 1948 declaration. You know, they find ways around it, but it's there, you know. I think the United Nations as a forum is a place where, you know, you're saying those rights need to be vindicated, and it's crucially then it's a process where we as people, as part of society, actually have to work towards, you know, holding those in power, whether it's in Ireland or at a global level, to account, to ensure they're actually working towards vindicating those rights. Just maybe that's kind of something like, maybe, I don't know if you'd have more to say about that, like, who, in terms of rights, when they're being vindicated, like, is it all just on us as individuals, or how do you think rights should be vindicated?
Yeah, so like, absolutely, like, I think we're not just individuals, we live in society.
Yeah.
You can see what happens whenever like a gang of criminals like the Nazis take control of a country like Germany. But even without going to that sort of extreme, you know, even if you go to you know, you take a democratic society like the United States or Great Britain, you know, at the turn of the 20th century, like you said, not everybody had rights, so not all rights were equal. But the whole question is how do you extend these rights? And it's okay, it's up to us as citizens to seek these rights, but ultimately it's the responsibility of government, you know, as the legal leaders of the nation, to vindicate those rights. You know, we as people are rights holders. You know, we all are sovereign individuals. We all have those, like you said, inalienable human rights, and it's the responsibility of the state to vindicate those rights. And you know, like, that might mean taxation, that might mean regulation, that might mean new laws, that might mean that there's a higher rate of tax and a lower rate of tax depending on what you earn. And you know, there's always going to be wealthy people, and there's always going to be people who aren't wealthy. But unfortunately, probably there's always going to be some level of poverty that, you know, that we're trying to deal with in society. And it's really, really important that we always try to deal with that. But the key thing is that you don't allow, or that an elite doesn't emerge who are able to sort of take control of things. You know, that's the only way you can have a sustainable society. And I think that idea of sustainability is really important. Like, you know, what sort of society will last? What sort of society isn't just going to descend into chaos? So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but sustainability and chaos and stuff.
I mean, I think it, in a way, it maybe comes back to some of the stuff you were saying about responsibility. And I suppose I think it's Article 29 in the Declaration. It says, you know, just reading it here, due recognition and respect for the rights and freedom to others. So it's that we have rights, but we also, our rights can't trump other people's rights, or the pursuit of, you know, our right to freedom can't trump someone's right to discrimination. So there is that balancing act, and I think, you know, you really touched on it there about responsibility on government. But I wonder, you know, we both work kind of a global space, and is there a greater responsibility on, you know, people people living in the global north. So the global north was really the countries kind of north of the equator, where about 80% of the wealth is. So you're talking really about Europe, North America, and then you obviously include places like Australia in that as well. While the global south would include most of Asia and Africa and South America, where most of the people in the world are, about 80% of people, but only about 20% of the wealth. And I suppose we're seeing now, in a COVID-19 context, where, we as societies in the global north, where we've obviously suffered massively because of COVID, but we're also first in the queue to get the vaccine, and probably everyone in Ireland will have the vaccine by the end of 2021, while people in the likes of, say, Mozambique could be waiting till 2022, 2023, and that's massively unfair. And it's not just like young, healthy people that aren't getting it. It's vulnerable people, it's people with pre-existing conditions, it's people that, if they got COVID, could very well die. So I just wonder, because, obviously there's plenty of people living in poverty in the global north, but it is relative poverty. We have a lot more privilege, we have a lot more advantages, and look, we sit here, I suppose, as two educated, white middle-class men, for want of a better word, so is there an onus on individuals with privilege or relative privilege to have greater responsibility than those that have, I suppose, no privilege at all?
The old quote from Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. But it's true, the whole point is that society, we're not individuals. We're, despite what Thatcher said when she said, well, there's no such thing as society, we're all individuals. Yeah, we are all individuals, but we're also live together, live in harmony. Or we strive to live in harmony, at least. So we have to have a responsibility. We have to be responsible. Like you said, that article, Article 29 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, speaks about responsibility, and without that article as sort of the keystone, it holds all the other articles in the Declaration together. So yeah, we do have responsibility, and as well as, it's not just that we as citizens are sovereign individuals living in a society, and then we elect our government, and our government is responsible for organizing our society. So we're people, individuals, and we live in community. But also as countries, we're a community of nations. So I don't believe that a society can last. I don't believe a society is sustainable if you have an elite living in the lap of luxury, and you have a huge section of the population living in destitution or living in poverty, or where their rights are being undermined or denied. And by the same token, I don't think the global community is sustainable if a handful of countries in the global north, in North America, in Europe, in parts of Asia, and also, of course, as you said,